Hello, my name is Sailor Sidney, and I'm very happy today to introduce to you Sunday School from First Church Congregational of Methuen, Massachusetts, United Church of Christ. I'm an old friend of Pastor Bill's. We met way back in middle school when we were on the same basketball team. Only neither one of us got to play very often because there were a whole lot of other players who were better than we were, and so we just sat on the bench and we talked and we became friends, and we're still friends today. And I thought I'd come back and help out by introducing today's Sunday School. But I was really sad and even a little hurt and maybe even angry when last week Cowboy Joe, who just rides around on a horse and sings, introduced the story that's my favorite story in all the Bible. Don't you think a sailor who sails the 7 seas should be the one to tell the story about Jesus getting into a boat and calming the storm, speaking to the wind, saying peace, and to the waves, saying be still? It really frustrated me, Cowboy Joe. In fact, I'm kind of angry at you. I'm not sure, but I feel like we ought to talk about it because I'm really upset that you told my story last week and I didn't get to tell it.
Oh, Sailor Sidney, I'm so sorry that I hurt your feelings. That was not my intention at all. It never occurred to me that by telling me a story about Jesus in a boat, that I was telling a story that maybe you'd want to be telling, which of course you'd want to be telling it, what with your being a sailor and all. I'm right sorry. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, and I'm really grateful that you would take a moment to tell me that you're upset and let me know how you're feeling. It's really good that you used your words, and I'm just real grateful for that. I hope you'll be the kind of friend that'll listen to me too. When I'm getting upset, maybe I can talk to you and you can help me feel better. And as far as the boat stories go, well, I think it's just fine for you to tell all the boat stories, and I'll tell all the horse stories, or maybe just stories that are on land. So maybe the thing to do is to talk to Pastor Bill and just ask him if maybe you could introduce the boat stories from here on out. I think that'd be real good. So, well, thank you. I'm really appreciative that you would tell me how you're feeling. I'm glad you're my friend.
Well, thank you, Cowboy Joe. I really appreciate those words. I feel like I've been heard, and I appreciate that. And you're right, I could have talked to Pastor Bill and told him that I'd really like to introduce the boat stories, even though that doesn't mean I necessarily would have gotten to introduce the boat stories. So I'll talk to Pastor Bill and ask him if I can do a boat story. In fact, I'll just say it right now, Pastor Bill, if there's a boat story about Jesus you could tell today for the Sunday School, that'd just be really ducky with me. I'd really appreciate it. And Cowboy Joe, I just want to say thank you for listening to me. I really appreciate it. It's nice to be heard. Okay, boys and girls, now I'm going to hand it off to Pastor Bill, who will tell us our Bible story for today.
Good morning. Thank you, Sailor Sidney, and also Cowboy Joe. I am Bill Ingraham, Senior Pastor of First Church Congregational of Methuen, Massachusetts, United Church of Christ. I'm out in my backyard. I was gardening earlier today, planting daylily roots, little clumps of daylily that I spread out in the garden, 10 new plants to accompany all the other daylilies I have that were given to me by a friend. And I also planted a bunch of daffodils, a couple of weeks ago maybe. So I'm hoping this garden will be very beautiful come spring and into the summer. So Sailor Sidney had wanted a story about a boat, and I am going to tell a story that has a boat in it anyway, but the story also has a farmer, and that's why I'm out here again with my shovel, even though I've already cleaned up from the gardening work that I did. So Jesus was with his disciples beside a lake, and a crowd of people started to gather. They wanted to hear him speak. They wanted him to do healing. And so as the crowd came, the crowd got bigger and bigger, and Jesus knew there wasn't a way they were going to be able to hear him and see him unless he got a little bit of distance between himself and the crowd. And so he got into a boat there on the shore, had them push it off from the shore a little ways, and he sat down in the boat. That's what a teacher did in the ancient world. world. They sat down to teach. He sat down in the boat and he started teaching the crowd. And he taught the crowd in parables. Parables are stories. They're not historically true stories, but they are stories that are true. They tell a truth about humans, about the world, about God. And so Jesus taught them in parables, and he started with this parable. There was a sower who went out into his field to sow seed. A sower like a farmer, or in my case, a gardener. And the sower threw the seed out on the ground. And some of the seed fell on the path, which was very hard. And so that seed didn't even sink into the soil, and the birds came and they gobbled it all up. Some of the seed fell on rocky soil. There's not a lot of dirt when there's a whole lot of rocks involved, and so while the seeds did manage to put down root, the roots didn't get very big, they didn't go down very far, and so when the hard, hot, harsh sun hit those little baby plants, they just withered up and died in the heat of the sun. Some of the seed fell among the brambles or weeds, and so though that seed grew, the weeds grew up around them and choked them out, and so there was no harvest from those plants either. But some of the seed fell on good soil, like the soil I dug up and tilled around this garden in the back of the parsonage yard. Those seeds that fell on the good soil, they grew deep roots and big plants, and they harvested many more times what was planted. Some instances 100 times, some instances 60 times, some instances 30 times. And so they produced a great harvest. And Jesus ended this parable by saying, "Let those who have ears hear." So the key to a parable is we get to figure out what we think it means. What do you think this parable means? There's a couple of ways to think about it, more than a couple, as many ways to think about it as there are people who are thinking. One way to think about the story is that the soils represent how it is we receive something. For example, if a teacher is teaching you something at school, it might be that your mind will be like the hard soil, the ground, the path. And so the seeds get cast by the teacher as the teacher's trying to help you learn something, but you have your mind shut like a trap, and so you can't hear what's being taught to you. Or maybe the seeds fall into the weeds. You're thinking about other things, and so the weeds, what you're thinking about, grows up and chokes out what it is the teacher's trying to teach you. Or maybe you're like that good soil, and the seeds that fall that your teacher casts in your direction take root in you as you think about it and ponder it and consider it. And so you learn a whole lot, and it's like those seeds in Jesus' story that grew up to produce 100 times, 60 times, 30 times. Another way to think about this is our interactions with each other. Just think about Sailor Sidney and Cowboy Joe. Sailor Sidney was upset. His feelings were hurt. He was even a little angry. And he talked to Cowboy Joe about how he was feeling. And Cowboy Joe listened respectfully. He paid attention both to what Sailor Sidney was feeling and also to what Sailor Sidney was saying. And because he listened, they were able to come to an agreement together that helped Sailor Sidney to feel better and even helped to resolve the issue between them. Cowboy Joe could have been like the brambles and the weeds. He could have argued back immediately and been really defensive. Or he could have been like the path, the hard ground, and not even listened at all. And what Sailor Sidney said would have just been like water off a duck's back. He wouldn't have received any of it. But instead, he cared enough to listen, and because Sailor Sidney cared enough to share his feelings, and Cowboy Joe cared enough to listen, they were able not only to be friends, but to become better friends as they heard each other, listened, cared, worked out their problems. There's just a couple of ways to think about the story. A third one, what if the seeds being thrown by the sower is the word from Jesus about God's boundless love, about the way God cares for everybody, not despite the differences between us, but because of the differences between us, because God made us like we are. What if the seeds being sown are seeds of God's love and care and blessing and healing that are intended to grow in us as we learn to know God's love ourselves and to share it with others too? Then for sure, we'd want to try to be the good soil that receives the seeds that God's planting through Jesus of love and hope, and let them grow up in us to big, beautiful plants, so that in our lives, what we say and what we do, we help to make God's love and care known in the world. Well, there's 3 different ways to think about this parable. Maybe you have other ways you think about this parable too. I'll leave it to you to think about that. You can talk to each other, talk to your parents, your siblings, your friends. Most importantly, I hope you'll be working on figuring out what it means for you to be a person of faith that walks in the ways of Jesus and tries to make God's love known in who you are and how you are in the world. That's the end of today's lesson. I'm going to hand it back to Sailor Sydney to bring this to a close for the week. See you next Sunday on Sunday School at First Church.
Why, Pastor Bill, I loved that story so much. The fact that my favorite part was when Jesus turned around and got into the boat and they pushed it out a little bit. I would have liked it better if he went all the way out into the middle of the lake, or maybe even better onto the 7 seas to sail like Sailor Sydney does. But I'm just glad that there was a boat in the story. It makes me feel all warm and cuddly inside to know that Jesus sat down in a boat and talked to the people that had gathered, and they heard what he had to say. It's just a wonderful story. And I appreciate, too, that Cowboy Joe's in my conversation could be part of the lesson, because it just feels so good to talk when you're feeling upset and have somebody listen and really care. And my friend Cowboy Joe did that for me, and so do you, Pastor Bill. And I know all the boys and girls appreciate it when they're feeling upset and somebody will listen and they can say how they're feeling. Well, it's time for me to end the lesson today. You know, there's a song I'd like to sing. All the other people leading Sunday school have had a song, and I'm going to have a song too. It's a song that talks about my desire, really, to leave the 7 seas and be a star on Broadway. I think I'd be really good if somebody watching this show is a producer on Broadway. Just know that I'm ready. I'm ready to leave the oceans and to leave the ship behind and come and be a star on Broadway. Maybe in a musical about a sailor on a ship. But I'm going to sing a song. Here's the song. I don't care if I'm ever rich or famous. I just want to be a star. I don't care if they're asking what my name is. I just want to be a star. Oh, please, if you're watching and I can be a star in your Broadway performance whenever Broadway opens up again, just let me know and I'll come to Broadway and I'll perform for you. And for you boys and girls who are watching today, thank you so much for being a part of Sunday School at First Church Congregational in Methuen, Massachusetts, United Church of Christ. Next week at 11 o'clock on Facebook and YouTube, Pastor Bill and one of his friends will be back for Sunday School at First Church. Have a good week. I'll see you soon, I hope, maybe with another story about Jesus and a boat. Talk to you later. Happy sailing.